So as we're going to find out as we go through this, we need to create a huge amount of power and potential to generate power in order to make America energy independent and carbon or a lower carbon economy. So you want to make that challenge, because it's a huge challenge, as small as possible. So that means you want to look at how we use energy as individuals. This is how you put yourself, or in my case myself, into the picture of the larger energy problem. So we can look at detail about how much power I use or how quickly I use energy in my life. And I'm using watts because that allows me to compare the things that I do yearly, like flying a whole lot and driving a whole lot, to the things I do monthly, like heating my house and charging my cell phone, to the things I do daily, like eating and catching the ferry or the bus to work. So again, you can think about, as I go through all these numbers in watts, in terms of the number of light bulbs required to be lit all the time for each of those activities. I'm a businessman, so I have to do a lot of flying, and I flew more than 100,000 miles in 2007. That was the equivalent of almost 8,000 watts of power. And that's even if I just take the most conservative assumption that I was flying on fully loaded 747s. This is a lot more flying than the average American. And in fact, it was almost half of the power consumption that I used. In fact, a single trip to visit my parents in Australia was probably 5% of all of the energy that I used in 2007. Driving, on the other hand, I drive less than the average American. I drove about 10,000 miles in 2007. The average American drives about 15,000 miles. I drove the majority of my miles in the most fuel-efficient production car ever made, the Honda Insight Hybrid, and I used about 1,500 watts, 1,500 watts of power for all of my driving. For the average American, it was probably double that, about 3,000 watts. In terms of my house, I had to heat it. As you can see, I used a lot more energy for heating it in the winter months, January and December. I had to take hot showers. We have a gas dryer for my clothes. I have an electrical toothbrush and a laptop computer and a whole bunch of other things like the refrigerator. Most of the energy was in gas, a little less in electricity. In reality, I probably used half of the average American and about 600 watts in my house. At work, I also use a whole lot of energy to keep the lights on, to keep the building warm, to keep my colleagues warm. I used about 600 watts in total for the power consumption at work. You know, more than half of that was electricity and a little bit in gas, a little different to at home. In terms of my diet, you can also estimate this, not as accurately, but we can at least sort of get a handle on how it compares. I used 800 watts of power to feed myself all year. I can even count down to the milk and cheese I use, a couple of glasses of wine a night, vegetables I eat, all of my share of the US's use of synthetic fertilizer, my share of the US's transportation for all the trucks bringing the food from market, and even the meat and fish. Meat, hugely energy consumptive in my lifestyle. So we can change a lot of things by picking out which ones use a lot of energy. We all live in society, so the US government uses energy on our behalf, and that's the gas to drive tanks, the electricity to keep the lights on in the White House. It's even the energy to launch NASA's space shuttles. For each of us, the government uses actually a surprisingly large amount of power. So here it is. This is my entire life. You can see every single activity. More than 40% of my energy consumption is in flying, then a little bit in driving, the eating, the government, as I mentioned, but then there's this pink section you see here. That's all the stuff I own. My sofa, my kayaks, my golf clubs, all of the objects. And the power consumption there is in the energy used to make them and deliver them to your doorstep. I used 18,000 watts. If you're an average American, you used around 11,400 watts. As we go through the rest of this and understand America's energy challenge, we're going to all face the question of how do we reduce that number while increasing our quality of life.